Chris Klein had asked us to tape our sessions so that he could use them for other PD. So that's why we're taping our session this time. So awesome. Hi, Chris. So exciting. Okay, it's exciting when you know someone in one of these things. Okay, so we are, let me share my screen. Go back to the beginning. Okay, cool. And let me do slideshow. Okay. So I've been teaching forensic science here. This is my 15th year at Blair. And I've used lab notebooks in all of my classes. So forensics, which is all different levels mixed together. And then I teach organic chemistry and chemistry of art, which are upper science electives. And I use lab notebooks there too. And I've used them every year that I've been a teacher so far. So what we wanted to do was Allie and I both use lab notebooks throughout the whole year in our class, but we use them in a different way. And so we wanted to do a showcase kind of how I use them, how Allie uses them, how we use them in different levels, different ways. And hopefully you can see how this fits into your class. You're always welcome to reach out to us on Outlook and ask any more specific questions about, things that you wanted to try or maybe some ideas or things like that. So this slide, I organized, I showed the cover of my lab notebook and kind of highlighted a couple things. So first of all, we both use composition notebooks. Don't use spiral notebooks just from experience because the spirals tend to get tangled together and they tend to get like smashed in a very short amount of time. And then it's just very like the composition notebooks hold up very well. They used to sell 100-page composition notebooks. They've kind of gone down to 80 and I found both work fine for a year-long science class. I make my students like little kind of labels for their lab notebooks and then they write their name. I print them in different colors. And then just some things to personalize their lab notebooks. And just to think of, in terms of getting lab notebooks, I've done it different ways. I've had students go, I basically say on the first day of class, you need a composition notebook and, let them know that ahead of time and, I need it in a week or whatnot. But I've also bought them in bulk. And so I've done it different ways. Sometimes that we've had extra lab notebooks at the school and we've just used them. So it kind of depends on your school and funding and how you would want to do that with those materials. So that's kind of, this is my cover. On the right-hand corner, I have them put the number of the class period they're in. I color code them and it makes it easy for me to figure out what class period the lab notebook's from. Like I said, I do it in all my classes. So if I had 5 classes and 30 kids, it's a lot of lab notebooks. And then I also I have I've sort of developed this little system over time where I have a sticky piece of Velcro that's adhesive. So it's like a tape and they put that on the cover. And then I have a series of labels that I use. So for instance, if a student revises their lab, so in my class, lab notebooks are revisable, until the quarter ends. And so if they revise their lab, I wouldn't know they revised it. And I'd have to, flip through pages to try to just see any changes. And so instead, what I do is I have these labels, they have Velcro on the other side, they stick them to the cover, and then they can write on there with like an overhead or a like expo marker, the pages, and then I'll know to regrade them. And so that's kind of how I set up a little of like my structure. The pros and cons, I think both of us, I think by the end of the presentation, you'll see a lot more pros just because we are really dedicated to using them. But I'll present some, we'll present some things just to keep in mind. Maybe the cons are more things to think about to, just to kind of better prepare yourself for them. But the pros, students definitely have a sense of ownership. They really love their lab notebook. And if they even think they've lost it, it's like almost devastating. Like they carry it around with them. Like my students take it back and forth with them. They'll work on it at home and in class. And, but they're kind of like a cross between a lab notebook and like a scrapbook. Like they really love them. They refer back to labs, and we will as the semester goes on too. Like, let's say I'll do something summative, where we combine a couple units and we do like a hands-on lab that has multiple pieces of evidence in it for forensics. Then they can go back and look, oh, how did I analyze that evidence in the lab, previously? And they can also see their progress. So you can kind of see in one place, I think where you have like a worksheet, they kind of, it's more, students tend to like recycle them and not keep them. And it's hard to kind of keep track of them. Whereas this is like attached, it's bound in the journal. And I tell students too, it's not like it's an ongoing dynamic kind of entity. So they make revisions, they cross things out, I write in them. So it's not like this is sort of a published, lab report. It's a lab notebook and they're keeping data and things like that. So again, you kind of see their progress throughout the year. And my students keep them. I mean, I've had students come back 5-6 years later and they have had their lab notebook from my class. Whereas I doubt they have, things from like paper copies of other papers, probably even from my class. I know that in AP classes, often lab notebooks are used as references in college. So they'll take their lab notebook to college with them and use them as a resource. The cons are that they are heavy. And so my advice is to not bring them home if you were going to grade something from home. I always grade lab notebooks at school. So I prioritize grading them at school first before I would grade like anything I'd have on paper. And thinking about labs a little bit long-term with the unit you're doing is, don't plan 2 back-to-back labs on consecutive days, because then might not have enough time to grade the first lab before you hand it back. There also is some time dedicated at the beginning of the year to teaching students how to organize and use them. So I take, a block out and we set them up, we make them look really nice. They create their table of contents. We tape everything in. And it's really nice because I think they, again, I would say, keep your lab notebook. Like, if you organize it from the beginning, you're more likely to kind of maintain it. And lastly is being really dedicated to using them consistently. So, it doesn't work. Like I've known teachers who you might use it for like one lab and then do a paper copy on the next lab. And then that's very confusing to students. So like if they're doing a lab, they know it's in their lab notebook. And the pro of that though, is they become very routine. Like they come in, after, maybe a month or two where they've used them a couple times and I give them a rubric, which I'll show you in a second. And they literally come in, tape in the rubric, write the title, write the purpose. They like are ready to collect data. Like they automatically kind of have a routine. And I also think just in this day and age where we are using more technology, I'm not saying I don't use technology in my class, but my students, I think there's something to having them being able to like cut things out, tape things in, organize, actually handwrite something. Like there really is a skill to that I think students need more practice with. So some tips. This is a picture of a lab, like a student's lab notebook, sort of mid-year. I use stickers to kind of decorate their lab notebooks. So I have them, they're all Halloween themed because I teach forensics, but I know most people don't think that high school students want stickers, but they do. They love stickers. So on the binding of my lab notebooks, I use a marker. And so every lab I grade, I put like a little strip of marker. And then what that allows me to do is look at a stack of lab notebooks very quickly and determine, oh, I've graded all of this lab, but this, and I can pick out one and say, oh, I didn't grade this lab from this particular student. And that saves me a ton of time. So I'm not flipping through pages. Did I grade this? Did I not? And the last thing, I already kind of repeated those two, is I give some students really substantial feedback. Not saying I don't give them feedback for all their labs, but meaning like at the beginning of the year, I read every word, I write tons of comments, because I think that the more they know it's a kind of a dynamic process and that you're really reading them, it cuts way back on like students like copying off each other, like because students don't want to give each other their lab notebook. Like they don't trust another student with it. So like I very rarely deal with that. And I think the students just, it's kind of that buy-in and the investment. And so like the first couple labs are much more time consuming grade, but I think it pays off long-term for the rest of the year. So in a little bit of like formatting, the inside front covers of my students' labs, I have like the lab format so that it's almost like a template so they know what to put in their lab. I do two types of labs. I do kind of a traditional lab format where there's, you know, an introduction where they have to read something about the science or the process or the technique used in the lab they'll do ahead of time. That's nice because they kind of come in with a little bit of background or questions and we kind of talk about it. The materials and method, if you have an AP class or you've been in a college science class that has a lab notebook, you usually write the material pretty meticulously. That I've kind of varied class to class depending on kind of the level of my students. In forensics, we more or less kind of write a paragraph to summarize what they did in the lab. Kind of like I say, you know, write a few sentences to a friend that says, in forensics, what did we do today? And that also gets them accustomed to writing, you know, what types of equipment they used and some of that technical vocabulary. And then they have results and they analyze their results. And then the conclusion is kind of like a little, almost like a reflection for them to kind of wrap up the lab. The station lab is something I do where they do more data collection. And so I skip some of the things like the introduction and the materials and method. I really focus on kind of just the results and the analysis. And so in my room, I'll have like 8 stations set up for a particular lab, and they'll go to each station and essentially kind of collect and analyze data. And so again, I probably split half the labs I do in one format, half in the other. So then they also set up a table of contents on the first page, you know, and they kind of maintain it throughout the year. They number their page numbers in their book. And again, these little things are they also help the kids to stay organized. And I think that organization helps them in just other classes in other ways, because it's things they might not have thought about, but then they use some of those techniques in other classes. This is just 2 examples. We do a lab on handwriting and ink analysis. And again, this is kind of like the intro. It's usually like maybe a page or 2 that they'll read as like a little introduction to what they're doing. And then the lab rubric, I make this ahead of time, and then I give it to them on the first day, and they tape it in their lab notebook. And that's kind of nice for me because, you know, I'm not taping in all the rubrics to their lab, but it also helps them because they use it like a checklist. So they'll check things off. They'll kind of almost like self-assess how well they're doing. And then they'll say, oh, Ms. Hart, I need help with this question, or, you know, can we work on this part? And so I think it helps them before they turn it in. And then I say, oh, you're missing something, or you need to revise something. It kind of catches some of those things ahead of time. The station labs we do, I do one on blood spatter. And again, there's like 8 stations set up. And again, there's a rubric, and they use it kind of like a checklist. And so they'll collect data and analyze their data. But it's really nice because they, you know, whatever it happens to be for their lab, you know, if they're collecting, you know, let's say we do a lab on like, you know, microscopes, you know, they're drawing pictures, they're labeling things, you know, they're taping in data they've collected like fingerprints or, you know, the blood spatter, they're, you know, making samples and putting in their lab notebook. And then it also cuts down if you have things that are like a lot of things in forensics are pieces of paper that are small. And so, you know, it organizes all those little pieces into one place. So, oops, sorry, hold on, go back. Sorry. These are hyperlinked. So it's like they're going to like the documents. Yeah. Oh, and let me put that in the chat right now. Sorry. I put a link into the chat that has the slideshow and if you click on the pictures, a lot of the pictures will take you to like a document that has some examples and some things like that. And this is just some pictures of some student work. You know, so again, they're kind of taping in their, you know, examples, they're highlighting, they're circling, they're organizing, they're drawing things. So it's very dynamic. And so those are some examples of my lab notebooks. Okay, so we're going to switch over to Allie. Allie's going to talk about how she does it in a different format, different way, and then we'll kind of come back together as a group afterwards.
So again, I teach ESOL sciences. I have ESOL 1s and 2s in Earth Systems class, and then I have ESOL 2s and 3s in chemistry. We use a journal more than just labs. We use them every single day in our classroom. Our warm-ups go in here. The students come in, they get their journal from the back of the classroom, they sit down and they start on their warm-up. On the first week of school, we decorate our journals. The ones in the slide that you see are not very decorated. They're mine. They're my sample journals. But the students get stickers. They get half sheets of paper that they can tape on and draw pictures, different colored tapes, really anything they want to do on it, they can do. It's their journal. They get to customize it. Then one thing that I've added this year, because my students were complaining that their journals were exploding since the year was going on, is I added these elastics. So we just did a single hole punch in the back cover, and then the elastic can just go right over it and it holds it closed. I had never done it before, but our journals were really starting to explode. So we needed something to keep it all together. On setup day, we put last names on all of the edges of our journal so that they can see it whenever it's in the cabinet. It doesn't matter which way it goes. They also number every single page. And then when you open it up, we have the periodic table on the front inside cover, and then our table of contents. So the table of contents with the page numbers matches all of our page numbers as you go through the journal. I do give them journal checks at the end of the quarters, and just give them free points for being organized and having their things glued in their journal on the correct page that matches their table of contents. It takes a lot on me to keep them organized and to kind of think ahead. So I know what page everything should be on, but it pays off in the long run because now they've got it down. So that being said, with the pros and cons, I love journals. It's something that the students have to show what we've learned all year. They do get very upset if their journal goes missing. I actually had a student's journal go missing last week, and I thought he was about to cry in the middle of class. We went through all the cabinets, we pulled all the journals out. We could not find it. Still have not found it. Where it went, I don't know, but hopefully it shows up. I also like them because students can refer back to them. Sometimes I just do a quick open note quiz and they get to use their journal. It's just a great way to show them how to use their resources and find information. It's also a great way to see progress as you go through the year. It gets fatter and fatter and fatter, and it's just awesome. They learn organization. I keep them in my classroom. I have cabinets for every period so that they don't get misplaced and don't get lost. Clearly, it's not foolproof because we lost one, but losing only one so far this year, I'll take it. They, for me, turn in their work before they glue it in. So all my worksheets, everything we do in class, they give to me, I grade it, I give it back, and then it goes in the journal. Which brings me to a con is the first few weeks, some students will glue it in their journal before they give it to me. But then they learn not to, it's okay. It saves me from having to carry all the journals. I just grade the worksheets, pass them back, and they glue it in. That being said, all of my worksheets, activities, warm-ups, everything, it takes a lot of prep for me. I have to figure out the layout of every worksheet and how I want it to be structured so that it can fit nicely into their journal. You also have to be very organized so that you can lay it out nicely on the journal. What page should everything go on? But if you take the first few weeks of school to really enforce the use of the journal, then it saves you a ton of time later. They start to love it also. And it really pays off. I keep my own sample journal so that if a student is absent on a journal day, they can just come in and they can grab my journal and look at whatever page they don't recognize, then they go and grab it from the bin. But then they can also glue in whatever pages I passed back the previous class and know where it should be. So there's a few different types of foldables that we use in my classroom. I use a lot, but there's a really simple way that you can start off with just taking a normal worksheet and dividing it into 3 sections so that it opens just like a book. So that's the simplest way to convert any worksheet into something journal ready. And I suggest if you've never used a journal, that's the easiest way to start. Leave 1/2 of the side blank and they just fold it in half and it's the same worksheet you would always give. Then if you want to take it another step, you could do something along the lines of still very similar. It's still like a half sheet, but you have this little tab here that keeps it all nice and flat. It's still just a simple worksheet. Then you could also, sorry. There's something called a 3-tab foldable where you have 3 pieces. Really, you can use it with however many pieces you want. You can do 4, 5, 6. I think I've even done 8. They start to get a little small at 8, but you can. Here's a 6-step. So it's really up to you how you use that. Then we can do, really, you can make any type of foldable you want. Bonding. One more page. There we go. Okay, this has 6 Vesper shapes, so they have their notes here. That's interactive. It keeps them engaged with the material. And then for some other ones, I take it up a little bit. Got a little carried away at times. And you can do some 3D models. You can have things popping out of your page just by the way you fold it. It's really up to you. The more comfortable you get with foldables, the more fun you can start to have with it. There's a lot of different ways you can do it. Especially with the ESOL kids, I like to use a lot of different colored paper. It helps them stay organized. They see everyone else on yellow paper, so they shove their yellow paper out. They also cut and paste little pieces together to make a full picture of something. And then they can just flip that up and they have their information about whatever it is you're teaching, like the rock cycle on the screen. It's up to you how you do it. Those are just a few other examples I have. It's a lot of card sorts, a lot of organizing. You're really just teaching them how to be organized, which is
good
something
for vocabulary development too, with like ESOL students. So
definitely,
yeah,
definitely. Yep.
So that was like our, main kind of piece of, examples and things we wanted to show. And so with a couple minutes left, if anyone has, we're going to post the, 1 second. We were asked to pass along a survey. Hang on 1 second. Let's put that in the chat. And does anyone have any questions, or like, have you tried to use lab notebooks and had some issues, or like you want to, but you have questions, or? So how long does it take a single lab? I've never timed like per kid per lab before. I think it depends on the length of the lab, just like anything else would be. Like, so if you have, my labs will kind of vary in terms of like how long we spend on them. We might spend 2 or 3 blocks on them. So they might be a really longer lab. They might be a little bit more technical in like how they collected data. So I'm looking at like, analyzing what they, looking at their data. And so I think that just, it kind of proportionally would transfer over to like, if you had something on a worksheet, like do you have a 2-page lab worksheet or like a 4-page lab worksheet, the 4-page is going to take longer. It takes a little bit more time to like, because you have to open up the lab notebook, but honestly, it's, it's so minimal when you're, adding up time. So I'd say for me, it's not a more, dramatically more time than it would be if something was on paper. I do not use digital notebooks, only for like a lot of those reasons. Like for forensics, for instance, there a lot of the data they're actually like collecting or making like fingerprints or they're making tire impressions, and then to do a digital notebook, they'd have to take pictures of each of those things, upload them and things like that, where they already have them as a physical copy. And I also find like, again, just them doing it on paper in their like journal, it really cuts down on those kind of academic dishonesty or them trying to like share data and things like that. I know that was definitely a problem when we were virtual, with students just, graded work getting passed to each other like virtually and dealing with a lot of those issues when we were virtual. And so I think that this whole process just really reduces that. I don't do warm-ups in my, Allie, do you?
Yeah, I do warm-ups. So they have a page that gets glued in their journal. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, and then there's 6 on the inside with spaces. And then when I do the journal checks at the end of the quarter, I also go through and add up all their warm-ups and put in a different grade for the number of warm-ups they have. As long as they have it written out, I give them the points. And then I decide based on like what the average in the class is, how many points there should be. So I don't actually keep track of the warm-ups. And it's really nice at the beginning of the period that they just come in, they get their journals from the back, they do the warm-up. It gives me time to set up whatever I need to set up after switching classes, or take attendance or deal with any other everyday things that we get faced with at the beginning of a period.
Yeah, and Lillian, to answer your question, neither of us, I mean, there have been exceptions that I've taken them home with me where it's just, I'm like the coach of Science Olympiad, and like it might just be like, a week where we're like getting ready, and it's like I just don't grade them, and I know we have a lab next week, and I'll take them home. That being said, I try to grade them only in class, and then if I have anything on paper that they do that's not a lab, some kind of other assignment, I'll take that home to grade if I need to. And so I purposely really try not to take them home. And the
yeah, I never take mine home.
Yeah.
Everything is graded before they glue it in their journal. So I need to take them home.
Yes. Yeah. So that, I think that's, I was going to say something else. I've lost my train of thought, but yeah. And Chris, those are good points too. Like in the chat, like, use it for 9th graders. Do you guys use it in your, in chem for the?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah. And do you do like, is it similar?
I try to I made it adaptable because I do the MYP rubrics for them.
Yeah.
But I do it similar to like what you do and what I do for AP.
Yeah. And that's the thing, you really have to think about your students and not reinventing, the wheel, so to speak, but like adapting materials you have. You could turn a worksheet lab into a lab. They, in my format, they could just write their data and collect their data in their lab notebook. You don't have to remake, materials. And like what Allie's saying is you could take a worksheet that you did in chem and just format it a little differently so it fits in the lab notebook. So it's not like something where you're like but I think it's worth it to try. You'll never know if it's something you love unless you give it a try. And the first year you do it, it's a little learning process because you're, trying to think, oh, I have to think ahead a little bit. Oh, how are we going to do this or that? But I think that like for us, I can't imagine, like I don't teach any class without a lab notebook. So it's something that you might just really enjoy and not realize that it's something you really, enjoy doing with your class. So, and your kids will benefit a lot. Like by the end, sometimes my students kind of grumble, like, because it's a little bit more work or they have to keep it or maintain it or things like that. But by the end of the year, they genuinely like love them, take them home with them and say, I'm so glad I have this. Like, this is my favorite thing from the class, my favorite thing from like my, science classes. Like they genuinely have really good feelings about doing them. So, but all right, well, we have the next session next. So send us an email if you have any other questions. Thank you so much for coming and, hope this was helpful.
Thank you.